Somewhere right now, there is a person who is very good at their job. They show up early. They work clean. They hit every deadline, keep every promise, and by every rational measure, they are doing everything right. And they are not getting ahead. You probably know this feeling from the inside. Here is the part that most financial advice skips entirely. That person is not failing because of what they are doing. They are failing because of something happening before the doing. Something so constant and so invisible that it never gets counted as a cause. It just gets called personality or luck or timing. But it is none of those things. Every dollar you have ever earned, kept, or lost can be traced back to a decision. Every decision can be traced back to a perception. And every perception was shaped by something happening inside your mind long before the moment of choice arrived. Which means your thinking is not a reaction to your financial life. Your thinking is the infrastructure your financial life is built on. Now, that claim probably lands somewhere between interesting and suspicious. Good. Hold that suspicion. This book is not asking you to dissolve it. It is asking you to test it. Because here is what nobody mentions when they dismiss thought-based approaches to wealth. Dismissing them is not a neutral position. Skepticism has a price, and that price gets collected quietly month after month, in opportunities that were never recognized, in decisions that were never made, in a life that keeps holding its current shape. You are about to find out exactly how that cost is calculated. And once you see the math, you will not be able to unsee it. Chapter 1. The skeptic is losing money right now. There is a question that has followed human beings through every era they have ever lived in. Not a question asked in lecture halls or written in textbooks. A quiet, private question, asked in the middle of the night when the numbers do not add up and the future feels heavier than it should. The question sounds like this: why do some people seem to attract money and others push it away, even when they are working just as hard? Across every culture, in every century, a small number of people have moved through the world as if they understood something their neighbors did not. They were not always the cleverest. They were not always the most connected. But they shared a specific relationship with what happened inside their own heads before anything happened in the world outside. You are asking that question right now, which means you are exactly where you need to be to hear what comes next. Let us start with you, and let us start honestly. You have heard something like this before. Someone told you that thinking positive thoughts would make you rich. Maybe it was a relative who pressed a worn paperback into your hands. Maybe it was a late-night video you clicked on and then quietly closed, embarrassed to have clicked at all. And something in you, the sharp, sensible part of you, pushed back. You thought this is not how the world works. Money is earned. Money is built. You do not visualize your way to a savings account. You work. You sacrifice. You execute. Real things happen in the real world, and the mind is just the thing that watches. That position feels rational. It feels like protection. Here is the question you should be sitting with right now. What has that position actually cost you? Hold on to that question. We are coming back to it. There is a version of skepticism that is wise. A version that says, I will not be fooled. I will not trade my savings for a seminar. I will not confuse wishful thinking with a plan. That version of skepticism is not the enemy. But there is another version, a quieter, more insidious version, one that has nothing to do with protecting you. That version says, the inner life does not count. What happens in the mind before action is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is what you do with your hands, your hours, your hustle. That version has been taxing you, without your knowledge, for years. Think about a man named 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓. 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 was 27 years old and working in logistics, moving shipments across a distribution network he could map in his sleep. He was precise. He was dependable. He arrived earlier than anyone and left later than most. On paper, 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓 had every quality the self-help world would praise: discipline, work ethic, a willingness to grind. But 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 had a private, fierce contempt for anything that smelled like soft thinking. When a colleague mentioned a book about the psychology of financial decision-making, 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 smiled the way you smile when someone recommends a vitamin you do not believe in. When a mentor offered to talk to him about how he thought about money, 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 declined. He said he was too busy for philosophy. He had freight to move. He had metrics to hit. 5 years passed. 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 got better at his job every single year. His reviews were strong. His salary moved upward in the careful, incremental way that salaries do when a company respects you enough not to lose you, but not enough to change your life. And every year, 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 felt a specific frustration, not at his employer, not at the economy, at himself. He could feel the gap between where he was and where he believed he should be. He could not explain it. He was doing everything right. So why did the gap keep existing? What 𝗜𝗓𝗓𝗓𝗓 could not see was the thing he was not doing. He was not examining the beliefs that sat underneath his actions like the concrete under a building. He did not believe money came to people like him. He did not believe, at the foundational level, that his income could operate in a different category than it currently did. He had never examined those beliefs because examining them would have meant entertaining ideas he had already dismissed as soft. So he kept working harder inside a structure that his own thinking had built and maintained and quietly reinforced every single week. That is the skeptic's tax. You pay it in the gap between your effort and your result. You pay it in the years you spend doing the right external things while the internal architecture stays untouched, unrenovated, running on the same wiring it was running on when you were 19. Now let us do something harder than a parable. Let us do your life. Revisit the version of you waking up each morning 3 years ago. The job, the account balance, the way you talk to yourself about what was possible. Now think about where you are today. Measure the distance honestly. In 3 years of effort, of showing up, of doing the things you were supposed to do, how much has actually changed? Not in direction, not in intention, in real numbers, in real circumstances. If the gap between your effort and your actual financial position has felt frustrating, sit with that. Because that feeling is data. It is not evidence of your failure. It is evidence that effort alone, without examining the thought structure underneath it, is like running on a treadmill. Movement without arrival. Here is something that changes the picture entirely. Neuroscience, not metaphysics, not motivation, actual neurological research, has established that the brain does not experience a vivid, detailed internal representation differently than it experiences a real external event. The same circuits fire. The same chemical signals activate. When you think about a financial situation with intensity and repetition, you are not decorating the surface of your experience. You are laying down infrastructure. You are creating the internal roads that your external behavior will travel without your conscious permission. This is not poetry. This is how the machine operates. The brain is a prediction engine. It is constantly scanning for patterns that match its existing models. When you hold a consistent internal model of scarcity, when your baseline thought about money is anxiety or inadequacy or not for people like me, the brain filters reality through that model. Opportunities that do not match the model are invisible. Conversations that could shift things never start. Decisions that would require a different self-image do not get made. Not because you are lazy, because the infrastructure is not there. Thought is infrastructure. That is the principle this chapter is asking you to consider. Not think happy thoughts, not visualize a sports car. Infrastructure, the deep, invisible architecture that determines what you can build on top of it. You can pour the most expensive materials on a weak foundation, and the building will still fail. You can have access to every resource, every opportunity, every piece of practical financial advice ever written. And if the infrastructure underneath your thinking is compromised, the results will keep disappointing you in the same specific ways. The skeptic's position is not neutral. That is the thing the skeptic does not realize. Choosing not to examine your thought-based infrastructure is not the same as being unaffected by it. The mechanism runs whether you believe in it or not. The only question is whether it is running for you or against you. Dismissing mental causation does not exempt you from it. It just ensures you never pick up the controls. Now go back to the question we opened with. What has your skepticism actually cost you? Not in some abstract motivational poster sense, in real terms. The opportunity you did not pursue because some background voice said. That is not realistic for someone in your position. The negotiation you entered already defeated because you did not believe you deserved the number you were asking for. The financial plan you never made because some part of you did not believe it would work anyway. So you waited, and waiting became the default, and the default became the years. The skeptic is not a bad person. The skeptic is a careful person who has been paying a tax they cannot see on a receipt they have never been handed. This book is not going to ask you to abandon reason. It is going to ask you to apply reason more completely, all the way down to the level where thought becomes action becomes result. Because that chain does not start with action, it starts earlier. It always starts earlier. You have been working hard on floors 2 through 10. This book begins on the ground floor. The most expensive belief you will ever hold is the belief that what happens in your mind before you act does not determine what is possible when you do. Chapter 2. What you dismiss is already controlling you. Here is a belief almost everyone who is skeptical of mental causation holds. They believe that because they do not subscribe to the idea, it does not apply to them. They believe skepticism is a kind of armor. They believe that by refusing to accept the premise, they have opted out of the mechanism entirely. They are wrong, not slightly wrong, not wrong in some philosophical, abstract sense you can argue about over coffee. Wrong in the way that matters most, wrong in their wallet, wrong in their daily decisions, wrong in the quiet financial ceiling they keep bumping their head against without ever seeing what it is made of. The mechanism does not require your belief to operate. It is already operating. The only question this chapter will answer is whether you want to keep riding it blindfolded or finally reach up and take the wheel. That last line from chapter 1 is worth sitting with for a moment. The most expensive belief you will ever hold is the belief that what happens in your mind before you act does not determine what is possible when you do. Most people read a sentence like that and feel something. Some feel recognition. Some feel resistance. And the ones who feel resistance are usually the ones it describes most precisely. Here is an open question to carry with you. If thought has been shaping your financial life all along, without your permission and without your awareness, what exactly has it been building? Hold that question. The answer is coming. But first you need to understand the structure of the thing you have been living inside of. Think of thought as infrastructure, not inspiration, not motivation. Infrastructure. Roads, pipes, electrical grids, these are systems that determine what is possible in a city before a single building goes up. Nobody standing on a street corner thinks about the sewage system beneath their feet, but without it, the city does not exist. The infrastructure is invisible and foundational and completely determinative of what gets built on top of it. Your habitual patterns of thought work exactly this way. They are not decorative. They are structural. And just like a city built on bad infrastructure, you can pour enormous amounts of energy into what is above the surface and still be disappointed. Because the problem is underground where you cannot see it. Consider Marcus, not a famous name, not a story you have heard before. Marcus was 31 years old, working in logistics, earning a reasonable salary and spending every Sunday night with a low-grade dread about money he could not fully explain. He was not irresponsible. He was not reckless. He saved the amount his employer suggested. He paid his bills on time. He told himself, and genuinely believed, that building real wealth was something that happened to people with advantages he did not have. Better education, better connections, a family with capital already in motion. That belief felt like clear-eyed realism to Marcus. It felt like he was simply seeing things as they were, without delusion, without wishful thinking. What he could not see was that the belief itself was the infrastructure. Every time an opportunity appeared, he filtered it through that belief before he ever consciously evaluated it. A colleague mentioned a side project. Marcus heard it through the filter and concluded before doing a single hour of research that it was not for someone in his position. A skills course crossed his path that would have raised his ceiling considerably. He noticed it, thought briefly about the cost, and let it pass. He was not lazy. He was not stupid. He was being governed by infrastructure he had never examined. 3 years later, the colleague who mentioned the side project was earning more in a month than Marcus earned in a quarter. Not because of luck, because the colleague had different infrastructure, and it rooted them to different decisions every single day. Call up the version of you waking up each morning 3 years ago. Not in a vague way specifically. Where were you working? What did you believe was possible for you? What did you dismiss without giving it serious thought? What did you tell yourself was not for someone like you? Now look at where you are today. The distance between those 2 points, or the lack of it, is a direct readout of the infrastructure you were running on then. This is not blame. This is a map. The science behind this is not mystical. It is neurological. Your brain is a prediction machine. Every second of every day, it pulls from stored patterns to generate expectations about what is likely to happen next. Those expectations drive attention. Attention drives behavior. Behavior drives outcome. The sequence is automatic and relentless. When your stored patterns say that wealth is for other people, your brain filters the world to confirm that, not out of malice but out of efficiency. The brain conserves resources by using what it already knows. Psychologists call this confirmatory attention. You notice what already fits your model. You overlook what does not. If your model says this is not for me, the evidence supporting that conclusion will appear everywhere. The evidence contradicting it will barely register. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable, observable, documented in laboratories with brain imaging and behavioral tracking. Thought shapes perception. Perception shapes decision. Decision shapes financial reality. Here is the part that should stop you cold. This works regardless of whether you believe it. The skeptic who dismisses mental causation as self-help nonsense is still running the exact same neurological sequence. Their patterns are still generating predictions. Their predictions are still filtering their attention. Their attention is still driving their behavior. The only difference between the skeptic and the person who understands this mechanism is that one of them is steering. One of them is not. That is the skeptic's tax. You pay it in opportunities you filter out before they fully form. You pay it in conversations you dismiss, courses you do not take, rooms you do not enter because your existing infrastructure has already decided the answer before the question is fully posed. The tax is invisible on any given day. Over a decade, it is enormous. Now here is where something shifts. The moment you understand that thought operates as infrastructure, not as decoration, a different question becomes available to you. Instead of asking whether this is real, you ask what your infrastructure is currently built to support. That question is productive in a way the original dismissal never was. A person who believes this has no effect can spend 10 years applying effort to the surface and wonder why the results disappoint. A person who understands the mechanism spends that same time examining what is underground, making adjustments, and watching what the surface produces as a result. There is a distinction worth making here, because it changes everything. There are two types of thought patterns that govern financial behavior. The first is what you consciously believe, what you would say out loud if someone asked whether you thought you could be financially secure. Most people in your position would say yes. The second is what your automatic processes actually assume, the quiet, running commentary that generates your micro-decisions all day long without ever surfacing as a named belief. These two types are almost always different. The gap between them is where financial stagnation lives. You can consciously believe that wealth is attainable and simultaneously run an automatic pattern that assumes every opportunity is too risky, every new skill is too time-consuming, every moment of focused financial attention is something that can be postponed until tomorrow. The conscious belief is the thing you tell yourself. The automatic pattern is the thing that governs you. Closing the gap between those two is not a spiritual exercise. It is a structural renovation. Later on, you will hear a point about willpower and financial discipline that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it alters how you build habits around money entirely. For now, return to the open question from the beginning of this chapter. If thought has been shaping your financial life all along, without your permission and without your awareness, what has it been building? Look at your current situation not as a collection of circumstances that happened to you, but as the visible surface of an infrastructure that has been running underground for years. What does the surface tell you about what is below it? Not with shame, with curiosity. An engineer looking at a bridge does not feel bad about what the stress fractures reveal. The engineer is grateful the fractures are visible because visible fractures can be repaired. Hidden ones cannot. Marcus eventually understood this, not through a dramatic revelation, through one conversation with someone who asked him a simple question: what do you actually believe someone in your position is capable of building? And he heard himself answer. And for the first time, instead of accepting the answer as truth, He heard it as infrastructure. Old infrastructure. Infrastructure that was built for a version of his life that no longer had to be the only version. The mechanism is already running in you. It has been running since before you were old enough to name it. So here is the only question that matters right now. If thought is already driving your outcomes, would you like to keep riding it blind, or would you like to drive it yourself? Chapter 3. Neuroscience answers what mysticism could not. Thinking about money does not make you rich. Thinking in a particular pattern, repeated consistently, physically rewires the brain toward the decisions and perceptions that produce wealth. That sounds like the kind of sentence someone stitches on a pillow. It is not. It is a description of a documented neurological process, one that researchers have spent decades measuring, mapping, and arguing over, and one that quietly settles the loudest question in this entire book. You came here skeptical. That is worth acknowledging directly. You have probably heard some version of the thought creates reality idea before, and something in you resisted it. That clean, rational part of you that refuses to believe the universe rearranges itself around your feelings. That part of you is not wrong to ask for evidence. What this chapter offers is exactly that. Not inspiration, evidence. The science, when you understand it in plain terms, does not soften the claim. It makes the claim more radical than any mystic ever dared to state it. Here is what decades of neuroscience are actually telling us. Your brain is not taking in reality and then forming beliefs about it. Your brain is running a continuous prediction engine. It generates reality before it even arrives, and filters everything you see through the beliefs you already hold. That one fact changes everything. There is a question buried in what the last chapter left you with. The question was whether you want to keep being driven by your thinking or start driving it yourself. Before you can drive anything, you need to understand the engine. This is the chapter where you meet it. Dr. Anna Chen spent 12 years at a neuroscience research lab studying what she called the architecture of expectation. She was not interested in positive thinking. She was not interested in money. She was interested in one precise problem. Why do two people with identical sensory information consistently perceive different things? Not different interpretations. Different things. Her early work focused on visual perception. What her team found rattled her enough that she spent the next decade pulling on that single thread. The thread led her to predictive processing. The core idea is this. Your brain consumes an enormous amount of energy, roughly 20% of your body's total energy budget, packed into about 2% of your body weight. Evolution does not tolerate that kind of expense without serious efficiency measures. So the brain, rather than processing every incoming signal from scratch, runs a model. It builds an internal simulation of the world based on everything you have experienced before. Then it uses that simulation to generate predictions about what is about to happen. The raw sensory data coming through your eyes and ears and skin is not the main event. It is a correction signal. It only gets processed deeply when it contradicts what the brain already predicted. Read that again slowly. Your brain is not watching the world. Your brain is watching its own predictions, and it only updates when reality pushes back hard enough. This is the predictive processing framework. Researchers like Carl Friston at University College London have spent years formalizing it into a comprehensive theory of how the brain works. Chen's contribution was narrower and more unsettling. She wanted to know what happened to the correction signals that did not fit the dominant model, the sensory data that should have prompted an update but somehow did not. What she found was that the brain has a threshold. Contradictory information below that threshold gets filtered out before it ever reaches conscious awareness. Not ignored, filtered. You never know it arrived. Here is where this stops being a neuroscience lecture and starts being about your actual life. Think about the last time you decided before walking into a room that it was going to be a difficult conversation. Think about how that conversation went. Not the words, the feeling of it. The way you read every pause as hostility, every neutral expression as displeasure, every short answer as confirmation that you were right about how it would go. That was not paranoia. That was your prediction engine running exactly as designed. It found what it was looking for because it had already decided what to look for. Now scale that dynamic to your financial life. If you carry a persistent background belief that money is hard to come by, that people like you tend to struggle, that the good opportunities always seem to land somewhere else, your brain is not passively recording evidence of that. It is actively generating the perceptual world in which that belief is correct. Opportunities that do not match the prediction get filtered below the threshold. You do not see them. You are not choosing to ignore them. You literally do not see them. That is the cost. That is the thing nobody names clearly enough. The skeptic's tax is not just the inspiration you declined. It is the specific, concrete, neurologically documented opportunities that your prediction engine quietly removed from your visible world before you ever had a chance to respond to them. Bring to mind the version of you waking up each morning 3 years ago. Not in terms of circumstances, in terms of what you believed about what was available to you. Think about what you were willing to reach for, what you talked yourself out of, what you told yourself was not meant for someone in your position. Now ask yourself honestly, were those limitations real, or were they the output of a prediction engine running an old program? You can leave that unspoken in words. Just let it sit. The second mechanism matters just as much as the first. Neuroplasticity is a word that gets used loosely these days, but its precise meaning is important here. The brain physically changes structure in response to repeated patterns of thought and behavior. Neural pathways that fire together grow stronger and more efficient. They require less activation energy to fire again. Pathways that go unused weaken and eventually prune. This is not metaphor. This is cellular biology. Dendrites grow. Synaptic connections thicken. The brain you have at 32 is physically different from the brain you had at 22. A meaningful portion of that difference was shaped by the thoughts you repeated most often. This is what thought as infrastructure actually means. Infrastructure is not inspiration. Infrastructure is not a feeling. Infrastructure is the underlying system that makes certain kinds of movement easy and other kinds of movement nearly impossible. A city with no roads to the port does not trade well, no matter how motivated its merchants are. A brain with no well-worn pathways toward opportunity recognition, risk tolerance, and resourceful problem-solving does not accumulate wealth well, no matter how much that person wants it to. The question that predictive processing and neuroplasticity together force you to sit with is this: what infrastructure have you actually built? Now meet the third mechanism. The reticular activating system is a bundle of nerve tissue at the base of the brainstem, and its job is essentially curation. Your 5 senses are taking in approximately 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind can process somewhere between 40 and 50 of those bits. Something has to decide which 40 bits make it through. That something is the RAS, and it does not curate randomly. It prioritizes what you have told it through repeated focus and emotional engagement that you care about. You have experienced this without knowing the name for it. You decide to buy a specific car, a certain blue model you had never particularly noticed before, and suddenly that car is everywhere. The cars were always there. The RAS had simply not flagged them as relevant until you gave it a new filter. This is the mechanism behind why a person who begins genuinely engaging with the idea of building wealth, not hoping for it, not daydreaming about it, but treating it as an active and immediate concern, begins noticing things they passed by before. A conversation at a dinner that mentions a market gap, an article that catches the eye, an introduction that 6 months earlier would have seemed irrelevant. The RAS has updated its filter. The world has not changed. The curated experience of it has. Chen's work eventually led her to a conclusion she was reluctant to publish. It sounded, in her words, uncomfortably close to the literature she had dismissed for most of her career. What she found was that dominant belief, not desire, not intention, but settled, repeated, emotionally reinforced belief, functions as the primary parameter for all three of these systems simultaneously. It sets the prediction model. It determines which neural infrastructure gets built. It instructs the RAS on what to surface. Desire without belief produces frustration. Effort without belief produces exhaustion. But belief, the kind that has been repeated long enough to feel like simple fact, produces a brain that is literally structured to move toward the thing it expects. Here is the principle at the center of this chapter, stated as plainly as possible. The brain does not observe reality and then form expectations. It generates expectations and then constructs the reality it can perceive from within them. This means that changing your financial life is not primarily a behavioral problem. It is a perceptual one. You do not need more hustle running through a brain tuned to filter out success. You need a brain that can see what is already there. As this book keeps moving, you will hear a point about motivation, specifically about where it comes from, and what it is actually for that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that point settles, it alters how you act every single morning. But for now, close the loop on where this chapter began. You asked, in your own quiet way, whether the science was real, whether there was a mechanism, whether there was something underneath the language that was not just wishful decoration on top of a comforting idea. There is. The mechanism is your brain. It is already running. It has been running your entire life. The only question is whether the parameters it is running on belong to you, or belong to the fears and conclusions you picked up before you were old enough to choose them. You can choose them now. What specifically has your prediction engine been trained to expect about money, and who trained it? Chapter 4. Your beliefs are a financial filter. Something valuable is leaving your hands while you keep moving. Not by a person, not by a market crash or a bad economy or an unfair system, though all of those things are real. What is being taken is more precise than any of that. Every hour you operate with a belief about money that does not match reality, you are standing in a room full of open doors and seeing only walls. The cost of that is not theoretical. It is this month's rent that felt impossible. It is the conversation you did not start because you assumed the answer would be no. It is the idea you dismissed before you wrote it down. That loss is not random. It is not bad luck wearing a disguise. It is a filter built quietly over years, running constantly in the background of every financial decision you make or do not make. Until you understand exactly how that filter works, you cannot turn it off. That is what this chapter is about. The previous chapter ended with a question worth sitting with. What has your prediction engine been trained to expect about money, and who did the training? Hold that question. The answer is coming. But first, you need to understand something about how your brain processes the world around you. Once you see this mechanism clearly, money will never look the same to you again. Here is something that happens to almost everyone who buys a car. You spend weeks researching a specific model, let us say a dark green sedan with a sunroof. The day you drive it off the lot, you suddenly see that exact car everywhere. On the freeway, in parking lots, turning at intersections. It is as if the city ordered 1,000 copies overnight. But of course, those cars were always there. What changed was not the world. What changed was your brain's decision about what was worth noticing. Neuroscientists have a name for the system responsible for this. It is called the reticular activating system. It functions as your brain's attention gatekeeper. Every second, your senses are absorbing roughly 11 million bits of information. Your conscious mind can process around 50 of them. The rest gets filtered out before you ever become aware of it. The reticular activating system decides what makes the cut. The primary signal it uses to make that decision is this. What does this person already believe is important, relevant, or possible for them? That is the mechanism, simple, biological, and running in the background of your life at this exact moment. Now take that mechanism out of the parking lot and drop it into your financial life. Imagine two people, same city, same week, roughly the same income. One of them grew up in a household where money was a source of tension, where conversations about wealth were either absent or laced with resentment, where the phrase, "we can't afford that," arrived so regularly it became a kind of weather. The other grew up in a house where money was discussed plainly, where opportunity was treated as something locatable rather than something given, where financial risk was understood as a normal part of building something real. Both of them walk through the same week, same coffee shops, same social media feeds, same neighborhoods, same news cycle, but they do not see the same week. The first person notices the rising cost of groceries. The rent increase notice slipped under the door. The headline about layoffs in their industry. These things are real, and their attention locks onto them with precision. What their filter quietly removes from conscious consideration is the conversation 2 tables away about a logistics problem a local business owner cannot solve. The email thread that mentions a gap in a market they know something about. The offhand comment from a colleague about a rental property that is underperforming. Not because they are less intelligent, because their reticular activating system was trained to sort for scarcity, and it is doing its job well. The second person notices the logistics problem, not because they are luckier, because their filter was trained on different beliefs, and those beliefs determine what registers as signal versus noise. This is what it means when people say that rich people see opportunities everywhere. It sounds like arrogance. It is actually neuroscience. You do not find the opportunities you are not wired to perceive. Go back to the version of you waking up each morning 3 years ago. Not abstractly, but specifically. What were you paying attention to most of the time when it came to money? Were you tracking what things cost, or were you tracking what things could become? Were you reading about other people's financial failures and filing them under proof that this is hard? Or were you reading about financial structures and filing them under things I might be able to use? Neither answer is a character judgment. But one of those orientations was commanding your reticular activating system to sort for threat. The other was commanding it to sort for possibility. And whichever one you chose, your filter obeyed. Here is the question this chapter has been building toward. What specific beliefs about money are currently acting as your filter, and are those beliefs true? Most people have never been asked that question in a useful way. They have been told to think positive, which is vague and unsatisfying and easy to dismiss. Thinking positive is not the point. Belief accuracy is the point. A belief is not a feeling. A belief is a prediction your brain has decided to treat as settled fact, and settled facts do not get questioned. They get used as the lens through which everything else is interpreted. There is a woman named Priya who runs a small catering business in a city in the Pacific Northwest. For the first 4 years, her business stayed flat. She was talented. Her clients loved her food. But every time she considered raising her prices, a thought arrived that felt less like a thought and more like a fact. People like me do not get to charge that much. She could not trace exactly where that belief came from. It lived in her somewhere between her immigrant parents' careful spending and a particular embarrassed silence she remembered from a school field trip where a permission slip got paid late. She had never examined the belief. It was just there, functioning as a financial ceiling she kept bumping against without recognizing it as a ceiling. Then a consultant working with her asked her to do something simple. Write down every belief you hold about money that you have never questioned. Not the ones you know are wrong, the ones that feel so obviously true that it has never occurred to you to test them. Priya's list had 11 items on it. She looked at the list for a long time, and she said out loud to no one in particular, "I do not know if any of these are actually true." That sentence was not a revelation in the dramatic sense. It was quieter than that. But it was the first time she had separated the belief from the fact. And that gap, that thin space between what she assumed and what was actually proven, turned out to be enough room to move. Within 14 months, she had tripled her per-event rate, hired 2 part-time staff, and turned down 3 clients whose expectations did not match her new pricing structure. The opportunities did not appear from nowhere. They had been in the same environment the whole time. Her filter changed. Her visible landscape changed with it. That is not magic. That is how the brain works. Now here is where this gets uncomfortable in a useful way. The beliefs that function as the most expensive filters are never the ones you know are wrong. You have already rejected those. The costly beliefs are the ones dressed as wisdom. The ones that feel like earned conclusions, not inherited limitations. Things like, money requires sacrifice I am not willing to make. Or, I am not the kind of person who is good with numbers. Or, every time I have tried something financially ambitious, it has not worked. Each of those sounds like a reasonable conclusion drawn from real experience. And each of them, if accepted as settled fact, instructs your reticular activating system to edit out every piece of incoming information that contradicts it. This is the skeptic's tax, not the cost of being wrong about something obvious. The cost of being confidently right about something that is quietly limiting everything you see. In a later section, you will hear a point about the relationship between action and belief that pushes directly against the usual belief. After that really registers, it alters how you decide when to move. But for now, here is the belief audit that Priya's consultant gave her, simplified into something you can do anywhere in the next 5 minutes. Think about money. Not as a concept, but as it exists in your actual life right now. The balance in your account, the income coming in, the expenses going out, the number that feels like your ceiling. Now complete this sentence without editing yourself. Money is always going to be. Whatever comes next, write it, or speak it. Or just hear it in your head without cleaning it up. That unedited completion is a direct line to your current filter setting. Then ask one question about it. Is this a fact, or is this a prediction I have been treating as a fact? The distance between those two things is not small. It is everything. If it is a prediction, it was trained into the system by someone else's fear, someone else's ceiling, someone else's experience of a world that may not look anything like the one available to you now. And a trained prediction can be retrained. Your brain is not neutral about money. It is active, sorting, filtering, deciding what counts and what disappears every second of every day. The question is not whether your beliefs are shaping what you see. They are. The question is whether the beliefs doing the shaping are ones you would choose if you were choosing deliberately. What are you currently invisible to, and what would it cost you to stay that way? Chapter 5. Thinking Rich is a Neurological Training Program. Thinking about money changes your brain in the same way earning money does. That sounds like something a motivational poster would claim. You are right to be suspicious of it, but stay with this for a moment. What neuroscience has uncovered in the last 30 years does not care about your skepticism. The same neural circuits that fire when you physically handle a transaction, negotiate a deal, or watch a number climb in your account will fire measurably, structurally, when you vividly rehearse those experiences in deliberate mental practice. Your brain does not make a clean distinction between a rich thought and a rich moment. It builds the same road either way. A single question drives this chapter through everything that follows. It is one most people never think to ask. If your brain cannot reliably tell the difference between a rehearsed experience and a real one, what exactly are you rehearsing every day? That question matters more than it might seem right now. Hold it. The previous chapter left you standing at the edge of a problem, the cost of remaining invisible to opportunity. But visibility is not just about attention or awareness. Visibility begins inside the architecture of your own thinking, in the neural pathways that either route your perception toward wealth or route it away without your consent. You do not get to see what your brain has not been trained to see, and training happens whether you intend it or not. That is the first thing worth recognizing. You are already doing this. Every day, without choosing to, you run mental rehearsals. The question is what scenario you are rehearsing. Most people in their mid-20s or early 30s who feel financially behind are running the same loop on repeat, not because they are weak or lazy, because that loop is familiar, and the brain treats familiarity as safety. You rehearse the version of yourself that checks the account balance and feels that low-grade dread. You rehearse the version of yourself that says no to things because the number is not there. You rehearse the conversation where you explain to someone why things are tight right now. And every time you run that rehearsal, your brain lays another layer of insulation around those pathways. They get faster. They get stronger. They get more automatic. This is not a metaphor. In the 1990s, a research team led by neuroscientist Álvaro Pascual-León conducted a study that changed how scientists understood the brain's capacity for change. One group of participants physically practiced a simple piano sequence every day for 5 days. A second group only imagined playing that sequence. They never touched the keys. When researchers mapped both groups' brains afterward using transcranial magnetic stimulation, the physical practice group and the mental rehearsal group showed nearly identical expansion in the motor cortex region corresponding to the fingers. The brain had reorganized itself based on thought alone. Let that sit for a beat. What the researchers had stumbled onto was not a curiosity about piano lessons. It was a demonstration of a principle with consequences that reach far beyond music. The brain rewires according to the patterns it rehearses. It does not matter whether those patterns come from the external world or from directed internal experience. Structure follows thought. Infrastructure, literal biological infrastructure, is built by what you repeatedly think. This is exactly what the recurring motif of this book has been circling. Thought as infrastructure, not as inspiration, not as attitude. Infrastructure, the kind that either supports weight or collapses under it. Now bring this closer to money. A sports psychologist named 𝗜𝗠𝗣𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 ran a study at the Cleveland Clinic that went even further. Participants who only imagined flexing a specific muscle group, without any physical exercise, increased muscle strength by 22% over the course of the study. Mental rehearsal produced measurable physical change. The implications for financial behavior are not a stretch. They are a direct parallel. When you rehearse making a confident financial decision, your brain strengthens the neural circuitry associated with that kind of decision-making. When you rehearse the feeling of financial constraint, you strengthen that instead. Remember the version of you waking up each morning 3 years ago. Not financially, not yet, just think about the person you were. The things you spent mental energy worrying about. The conversations you replayed. The outcomes you imagined. Now look at what materialized in the following years. Not perfectly, not magically, but directionally. Did your life bend toward the version of things you rehearsed most? For most people, the answer is quietly yes. The discomfort of that answer is worth sitting with. This is not the chapter where you are told your thoughts are wishes that the universe grants. That version of the idea has done real damage to real people who deserved a clearer explanation. The mechanism here is not mystical. It is neurological, then behavioral, then financial. Thought creates neural pattern. Neural pattern shapes perception. Perception filters which information you notice. Noticed information influences decision. Decision compounds over time into outcome. The chain is long, but every link is visible, and it starts in the same place. It starts in the brain you bring to every morning. Here is where most people stop reading carefully. They hear about neuroplasticity and they think, fine, I will think positive thoughts. But that is not what this is. Positive thinking without structure is just noise. What changes the brain is not positivity. It is specificity. It is rehearsal with the kind of detail that the brain can actually use as a building blueprint. Meet a woman named Carla. She was 31 years old, working as a project coordinator for a mid-sized logistics firm, making a salary that covered her bills and left almost nothing afterward. She had read enough about money to feel guilty about how little she had saved. But guilt, she noticed, was not producing better decisions. A colleague mentioned mental rehearsal to her as a technique from sports psychology, not personal finance. Carla was skeptical. She decided to try it anyway, not because she believed it, but because her skepticism had not been paying her bills either. She spent 10 minutes each morning running a specific mental scenario, not a vague image of being rich. She imagined sitting across from her supervisor in a performance review, speaking about her work with the kind of measured clarity that a person speaks with when they know their value. She imagined the physical sensations, the steadiness in her voice, the unhurried quality of her breathing, the moment when she named a number for a raise without apologizing for it. She ran this rehearsal with the specificity of a film she had already seen. 6 weeks later, that exact meeting happened. She had not planned it. Her supervisor called her in, and in the room something was different. She was not performing confidence. She was executing a pattern her brain had already rehearsed 42 times. She named the number. She got 80% of what she asked for, not because the universe heard her thoughts. Because her brain had laid a road to that moment, and when the moment arrived, she walked it without stumbling. The rehearsal was not magic. The rehearsal was training. Now here is the open loop this chapter began with, and it is time to close it. You are asked what you rehearse every day. The honest answer for most people is a version of financial life that already feels like proof of limitation. The dread at the balance, the apology in the ask, the assumption that the number will not be enough. Those are not personality traits. They are practiced neural pathways. And the extraordinary thing about neuroplasticity is that it is not a gift you are born with or without. It is a property of the brain itself, available to you at 30 as fully as it was at 8. The road can be rebuilt, but here is what the rebuilding actually requires. Vague intention will not do it. The rehearsal must be specific enough that the brain treats it as real experience. That means sensory detail. What do you see in the scenario? What do you feel in your body? What specific words are spoken? It also means emotional activation. The brain encodes more deeply when emotion is present. A flat, disengaged imagining of a financial win does not lay much track. A vividly felt rehearsal, one where you notice the sensation of certainty or the texture of calm authority, lays track that holds. The protocol is simple: 10 minutes. Every morning before you check your phone, before the day's noise floods the channel, you choose one specific financial scenario that is 6 to 18 months ahead of your current position. Not a fantasy, a plausible next move, a conversation you need to have, a decision you keep approaching and retreating from, a number you want to say out loud without flinching. You step into that scenario as fully as you can. You run it forward. You feel the version of yourself who moves through it with competence. You do this not to trick yourself. You do this because you are laying neural infrastructure. You are building the internal road before the external one is asked of you. Before long, you will hear a point about the relationship between action and result in wealth building that pushes directly against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it alters what you do first every single day. For now, understand this. The skeptic's tax, the cost of dismissing thought as a real causal force in financial life, is not paid once. It is paid daily. In every rehearsal you run without choosing to run it. In every neural pathway you reinforce by defaulting to the familiar version of financial struggle. The materialist view that dismisses thought as a driver of wealth is not just philosophically incomplete. It is expensive. You pay it in decisions not made, in numbers not named, in rooms you walked into underprepared, because your brain had never rehearsed what competence felt like in that moment. Your brain is a training program whether you manage it or not. The only question is whether you are the one writing the curriculum. Chapter 6. The billionaire's brain is structurally different. Every thought you are not thinking right now is costing you money, not metaphorically, not philosophically. Right now, while you move through your day on whatever cognitive defaults were installed in you over the last 2 or 3 decades, there is a particular quality of financial attention you are not holding. And that absence is not neutral, it compounds. Every day you operate from defaults that were never designed for wealth, you pay an invisible tax on your decisions, on your perception, on which opportunities your brain even registers as opportunities. The mechanism causing this loss is not laziness. It is not lack of effort. It is architecture, the structure of how your brain is currently organized. Here is what nobody tells you plainly. That architecture is not fixed. It is, at this moment, changeable. What you are about to encounter in this chapter is not motivational language dressed up in science. It is actual evidence for why the wealthy think differently and precisely how thinking differently made them wealthy in the first place. You have been asking the right question this whole time, maybe without knowing it. The question is not whether rich people got lucky. Some did. The question is not whether they worked hard. Many do and stay broke. The real question is what is happening inside the skull of someone who consistently sees financial opportunity where others see nothing, who holds a plan with calm certainty while everyone around them is paralyzed by doubt, who fails and recalibrates instead of failing and retreating. That question has an answer, a structural answer. And it begins with something a researcher named 𝗓𝗠𝗣𝗥𝗧𝗘 started to uncover in the 1990s, and that a generation of neuroscientists have since extended in directions that should stop you cold. 𝗓𝗥𝗧𝗘 was studying students. She was watching how children responded to difficulty, and she found something so clean it almost seemed too simple. Some children, when they hit a hard problem, leaned in. Others withdrew. The difference was not intelligence. The difference was what each child believed about the nature of their own mind. The children who believed ability was fixed looked at a hard problem and heard their brains say, "This is the edge of who I am." The children who believed ability was buildable heard something else. "This is where building happens." 𝗓𝗥𝗧𝗘 called this the growth mindset. For years it was treated as a psychological concept, a belief, a point of view. Then the imaging studies started arriving. Here is where it gets worth paying attention to. Neuroscientists began putting people with fixed and growth orientations into brain scanners and showing them their mistakes. What they found was that growth-oriented people showed measurably greater activation in regions associated with learning and error processing. The brain was encoding the mistake as information rather than as a threat. The brain was doing something different, not because of willpower, not because of attitude, because of a trained default. Enough repeated exposure to one type of thinking had reorganized which neural pathways fired first, fastest, and automatically. The brain had been restructured. Now hold that finding and take it one step further. This is the bridge almost nobody crosses. 𝗓𝗥𝗧𝗘's research was applied primarily to academic performance and general resilience. But financial cognition follows the same neural logic, and the implications are larger than anything the academic papers chose to headline. Financial perception is a learned function. Your ability to recognize a good deal, to sense when a situation carries leverage, to hold a long-term financial plan without your short-term anxiety hijacking it. All of that is a function of cognitive architecture. It is not innate, it is not luck, it is infrastructure, and infrastructure can be built. Look back to 3 years ago and keep it plain in how you thought about money, not how much you had, how you thought. What happened in your chest when someone brought up investing? What your internal voice said when you looked at your bank balance? What instinct fired first when you were offered a risk? That internal, whether all of it, was architecture. And if it has shifted at all in 3 years, even slightly, that shift happened because something restructured the defaults. What builds the infrastructure of a wealthy brain is not reading one book. It is sustained, repeated, high-intensity exposure to a particular quality of financial thinking. The word sustained is doing serious work in that sentence. This is the mechanism the materialist-only worldview cannot explain. It dismisses the inner work as decoration and focuses only on external action. But here is what the neuroscience refuses to cooperate with. The external action of a person who has reorganized their financial defaults looks completely different from someone who has not. They take different meetings. They ask different questions. They walk into the same room and notice different things. Same room, different brains, radically different outcomes. There is a man named David who grew up in the same mid-sized city as 3 of his close friends from school. All four started their adult lives at roughly the same income, around $30,000 a year, same rung, same city, same era. By their mid-30s, David's financial life looked nothing like the other three, not because he inherited anything, not because he found a secret investment that beat the market. What David did, starting in his early 20s, was spend 2 concentrated years reading, thinking, and talking about financial architecture in a way that bordered on obsessive. He consumed case studies of how businesses compounded. He wrote out financial scenarios by hand. He found people who were building wealth and spent time around them not to network but simply to hear how they reasoned. He was not acquiring money during those 2 years. He was acquiring cognition. By the time a real estate opportunity appeared in his city, something in him registered it before his conscious mind had fully formed the thought. He felt the geometry of it, the way the numbers fit before he had run the calculations. His friends saw the same opportunity. They saw risk. He saw a recognizable pattern. The difference was not intelligence. His friends were sharp people. The difference was that David had spent 2 years building the neural infrastructure that allowed his brain to process financial information in a particular way. That infrastructure had become automatic. His brain was solving for wealth without being asked. That phrase is worth sitting with, solving for wealth automatically, because that is the actual description of what distinguishes sustained high-wealth thinking from occasional motivational surges. The occasional surge produces temporary clarity. The sustained practice produces new defaults. New defaults mean your brain is doing the work even when you are not consciously directing it, while you are driving, while you are in a conversation, while you are watching the world move around you, and suddenly, without trying, you see something other people do not see. This is the open question you may have been carrying since the first chapters of this book. Not whether thought influences behavior, that part is obvious enough. The real question was always, is there actual evidence that thought itself, held at high intensity over time, physically changes the machine doing the thinking? The answer is yes. Not metaphorically, yes. Measurably, structurally, detectably, yes. Neuroplasticity is the word neuroscientists use for the brain's ability to reorganize itself based on experience. What you do repeatedly, what you think repeatedly, what you expose yourself to with sustained intensity, all of it leaves a physical imprint on your neural tissue. The myelin sheaths that wrap your most used neural pathways thicken, making those pathways faster and more automatic. The brain allocates more resources to patterns it uses frequently. The defaults shift. This is not speculative. This is the established mechanism behind every skill you have ever developed, including the skill of financial perception. The skeptic's tax, which has appeared quietly in earlier chapters, is exactly this. Every year spent dismissing the inner work as soft or irrelevant is a year the infrastructure does not get built. It is not a year of neutral waiting. It is a year of compounding absence. The person who began reorganizing their financial cognition 3 years ago now has 3 years of installed defaults that you do not have. That gap does not stay the same size. It widens, not because they are better than you, because they started the construction earlier. The good news, and there is real good news here, is that the brain does not care how old you were when you started. It cares about intensity and repetition. A 6-month period of deep, sustained, daily engagement with high-quality financial thinking will produce more structural change than 10 years of passive exposure. The brain rewards concentration. It rewards the decision to treat thought as infrastructure and to build it with the same deliberate attention you would give any serious construction project. Down the line in this book, You will hear a point about how long meaningful financial change actually takes that pushes directly against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it alters what you choose to do tomorrow morning. For now, the principle is this: you are not at a disadvantage because of where you started. You are at a disadvantage only if you continue operating on defaults you did not choose and have never examined. The brain you woke up with this morning is already capable of building the infrastructure of a wealthy mind. The only question is whether you treat that construction as real work, the most important work, the kind that compounds in the dark without fanfare, and then one day makes you feel, standing in a room full of opportunity, that you can simply see what others cannot. The curriculum has already been written in you by everything that came before. What changes now is who holds the pen. Chapter 7. Action is thought made physical, nothing more. Every action you have ever taken began as a firing of neurons before your muscles moved a single millimeter. That sounds like a biology footnote, not a financial principle. But stay with it. This one fact dismantles the most common excuse people use to stay exactly where they are. The people who say thinking is not enough, you have to do something, are right about the doing. They are completely wrong about what doing actually is. Every action you have ever taken, every phone call you made, every application you submitted, every conversation you walked away from was thought made physical. Nothing more and nothing less. The only question worth asking is whether the thought that launched the action was a deliberate one or an inherited one. If you have been acting and still not moving forward, the problem is not that you are not doing enough. The problem is that you are doing the wrong thoughts on repeat and watching them show up as the wrong actions on repeat. That pattern can change. This chapter is about how. The previous chapter ended with a line about who holds the pen. Here is what holding the pen actually means in practice. It does not mean sitting quietly and imagining money appearing. It means something more precise, more demanding, and frankly more interesting than that. Here is the open loop you need to carry into the next several minutes. There is a moment in every person's financial history, one specific moment, when the right action was available, when the door was genuinely open and they did not walk through it. Not because they lacked opportunity, because they lacked the internal architecture to see the action as possible. You have one of those moments. By the time this chapter ends, you will know exactly why it happened, and more importantly, whether it is happening right now without your awareness. Think about a man named Darius. Not a famous man, not a billionaire. Just a warehouse supervisor in his mid-30s who had spent 11 years watching other people get promoted above him. He was competent. He was reliable. He showed up early. Every performance review said the same thing: solid, dependable, no weaknesses worth mentioning. And every year the promotion went to someone else. One evening his coworker Priya got the regional manager position Darius had quietly wanted for 4 years. He congratulated her in the parking lot, drove home, and told his wife it was fine. That night he sat at the kitchen table and wrote down every time he had been eligible for a promotion and had not applied. The list had 9 items on it. 9 times. He had told himself the same story each time, that the timing wasn't right, that he needed more experience, that someone else was more qualified. He had believed those thoughts so completely that he had never even sent in the application. He had acted on his thoughts perfectly. The thoughts just weren't working for him. The following month, a new position opened in logistics management. Darius wrote a different story at that kitchen table. He spent 1 hour each morning for 3 weeks building a case for why he was the obvious choice. He submitted the application. He got the interview. He got the job. The opportunity had always been there. The thought structure that could receive it had not been. Here is what happened in Darius's brain both times. Neuroscientists studying motor behavior have demonstrated something that should permanently retire the thinking versus doing argument. Before a voluntary movement begins, before your hand reaches, before your foot steps, before your mouth speaks, there is a preparatory signal in the brain called the readiness potential. It fires several hundred milliseconds, in some studies more than a full second, before you are consciously aware of deciding to act. What this means is that your brain has already voted on whether to act, and how, before you consciously experience the decision. The action does not precede the thought. The thought structures the action before you are even aware it is happening. This is not philosophy. This is measured electrical activity in the prefrontal cortex and the supplementary motor area. If you want different actions, you need different pre-action thought patterns. Those are what the brain is reading when it assembles the readiness signal. Darius did not become a different worker. He became a different thinker about what the worker he already was deserved to do. The actions followed automatically. Now stop. Do something the skeptic in you does not want to do. Think about the last 3 months of your own financial life. Not in terms of effort, you may have worked extremely hard. Think in terms of the actions you did not take, the email you drafted and deleted, the conversation you meant to start and postponed, the number you should have asked for and rounded down, what was running in your head in the moment before you did not act. That pre-action thought, the one that felt like caution or humility or practicality, was not protecting you. It was building your current result. This is what the book has been calling the skeptic's tax. It is not a fine you pay once. It is a recurring charge, withdrawn automatically every time a thought structure built on doubt produces an action structure built on hesitation. You have been paying it without seeing the transaction. The bill is not labeled bad thinking. It is labeled I'll wait, and not yet, and someone else is better positioned for that. The materialist-only worldview, the one that says only actions count and thoughts are passive, has done enormous damage to people who are genuinely trying to build something. It sends them into furious, exhausting action without ever examining the engine producing that action. And when the action does not produce the expected result, the prescription is always more action. Work harder, apply more, grind longer. Nobody stops to ask what thought pattern is at the root of the action pattern. Thought is infrastructure. You cannot see infrastructure unless you look for it, but everything runs on it. The roads beneath a city determine which neighborhoods thrive and which stay isolated, which businesses can receive goods and which cannot. Nobody stands on the street and says, I don't believe in underground pipes. They just turn on the tap and expect water. Your beliefs, your habitual internal narratives, your pre-action signals, these are the infrastructure of everything you do. Change a road and the whole neighborhood shifts. Change a foundational thought structure and an entire category of action becomes available that was not available before. Here is where this gets specifically financial, because this book is about money, and it is time to be precise about that. Every financial decision you make follows this sequence. First, a situation presents itself. Second, your brain pattern matches that situation against stored thought architecture, past experiences, inherited beliefs, conclusions you drew at 15 and never updated. Third, that pattern match generates an emotional signal, safe or unsafe, possible or impossible, worthy or not worthy. Fourth, your readiness potential fires. Fifth, you act or you do not act. The money follows the fifth step, but it is determined entirely by the second. If your stored thought architecture contains the sentence, "People like me don't get rich," that sentence will fire in step 2 of every financial situation you encounter. You will not hear it as a sentence. You will feel it as a very reasonable, practical hesitation, and you will act accordingly. And the action will look like prudence and feel like wisdom, and will cost you everything that was available on the other side of that door. Most people try to change step 5. They force themselves to act. Willpower, discipline, accountability, all of it aimed at the moment of action. It works sometimes, the way patching a crack in a wall works sometimes. But the wall keeps cracking because the foundation is soft. What works permanently is changing step 2. Change the architecture and the signal changes. Change the signal and the action changes. Change the action and the financial result has no choice but to change. This is not mysticism. This is applied neuroscience in service of a completely practical outcome. The thought is not separate from the action. The thought is the root of the action, and the action is the only part you can see. Most people spend their entire lives trying to change what they can see, without ever touching what they cannot. A little later, you will run into an idea about motivation that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once you see it, that contradiction will resolve in a way that permanently changes how you approach the gap between knowing what to do and actually doing it. But for now, close the loop that was opened at the beginning of this chapter. That moment in your financial history when the right door was open and you did not walk through it, you know which one. You have probably told yourself it was timing or circumstance or someone else's decision. It was none of those things. It was a readiness potential shaped by a thought pattern that had been running long before that door appeared. The door was not the problem. The internal architecture was. And here is the part that matters now. That architecture is not permanent. You inherited it, you absorbed it, you repeated it until it felt like fact, but it was always thought, and thought by its very nature can be rewritten. Darius rewrote his in one evening at a kitchen table, not perfectly, not completely, but enough to produce a different action from the same situation. One action, one different result, one new piece of evidence that the old architecture was wrong. You do not need to overhaul everything you believe tonight. You need to find one stored sentence that is generating one category of hesitation. Then hold it up to the light long enough to ask whether it is actually true or whether it is just old. The thought came first. It always does. The only real question is whether the thought currently running in your head is one you chose, or one you inherited from someone who was also afraid. Your actions are not the measure of your effort. They are the record of your thinking. Chapter 8. The Compound Interest of Mental Habit. Something is being bled out from you without much noise. Not dramatically. Not with any warning sound or visible sign. It is draining the way a slow leak drains a tire, quietly, steadily, and only noticed when you are already flat on the side of the road. Every day you spend thinking in the same circuits you have always used, you are not standing still. You are falling behind. The thought patterns you practiced yesterday become the automatic responses of today. Those automatic responses become the ceiling on every financial decision you make for the rest of the week. The cost is not this month's missed opportunity alone. It is the compounding absence of all the decisions those opportunities would have funded, the choices that would have opened from those decisions. The version of your life that keeps receding just slightly faster than you can reach it. The invisible mechanism causing this is not bad luck. It is not the economy. It is not the people around you. It is the unexamined repetition of mental habits that were never chosen. This chapter is about breaking that cycle, deliberately, permanently. Here is the question that should stay with you as this chapter unfolds. What would happen if the most important investment you ever made was not financial, but neurological? Hold that question. The answer is coming. But first, you need to understand the cost of not asking it sooner. Look back at the life you were living 3 years earlier, not in vague terms. The specific apartment, the specific number in your bank account, the specific conversation you kept having with yourself late at night when you were tired and honest. Were the thoughts you were thinking then different from the thoughts you think now? Not the content of your worries, but the structure of them, the shape, the automatic response you have when something expensive comes up, the internal voice that speaks first when a new opportunity appears. If that voice has not changed, if the structure of your inner response is roughly the same as it was 3 years ago, then your external results will continue to be a variation on the same theme. Not because you have not worked hard enough, because the infrastructure has not been updated. That word, infrastructure, matters here. You would not expect a city to thrive if it never maintained its roads. You would not expect a business to grow if it kept running on the same software it installed a decade ago. You understand intuitively that systems require maintenance, that capacity requires investment, that the thing supporting all visible output has to be tended to. But most people never apply this logic to the mind. They invest in skills. They invest in tools. They never invest in the thinking that determines how those skills and tools get used. That gap, that precise, costly gap, is the skeptic's tax. It is what you pay every year for believing that thought is decoration instead of foundation. Here is what the neuroscience actually shows, stated plainly. Every time you think a thought, the neurons involved in producing that thought fire together. When they fire together repeatedly, the connection between them strengthens. The pathway becomes more insulated, more efficient, more automatic. This is not metaphor. This is measurable physical change in the structure of your brain. Scientists call the underlying principle Hebbian learning. What it means practically is this. A thought you practice daily is not the same thought after a year. It is a neural superhighway. It fires before you consciously decide to think it. It shapes your perception before your perception has a chance to report back to you. The thought stops being something you produce and starts being something you inhabit. That is the mechanism, and it runs in both directions. A man named Marcus discovered this by accident. He was 31, working in logistics, not unhappy but aware of a persistent ceiling he could not name. He had tried budgeting. He had read about investing. He kept stopping short of any significant action without quite understanding why. One evening, on the edge of exhaustion, he sat down and tried an experiment, not because he believed it would work, mostly because he had nothing left to lose by trying. For 2 minutes, only 2, he closed his eyes and held one specific image in his mind. Not a vague wish, a specific situation. Himself, seated at a desk he recognized, reviewing a bank statement with a number on it that he had written down on paper the week before. He stayed with the image until it felt familiar rather than foreign. Then he slept. He did this the next morning too. 2 minutes before he checked his phone, he asked himself one question and answered it honestly. What is one financial decision I could make today that my present self would thank my future self for? He wrote the answer in 3 words. He did not do anything dramatic. He just carried the answer. After 30 days, Marcus noticed something small. He was catching himself mid-thought more often. Hesitations before purchases that used to feel automatic. A slight pause before the impulsive yes. He could not have told you where the pause came from, but it was there. After 90 days, he had redirected an amount he considered insignificant into a position that 6 months later he considered significant. The decision had not felt like a breakthrough. It had felt obvious, almost easy. That is the detail worth sitting with. Not that he became a different person, but that the right decision started feeling like the natural one. Do not explain Marcus yet. Just notice that the sequence he followed was not complicated. It was consistent. Here is the morning practice, stated as plainly as it can be. 2 minutes, before your phone, before the news, before anyone else's voice enters your attention. Sit upright, not rigid. Close your eyes. Bring to mind one specific financial outcome you are working toward, not a fantasy, a target. Something concrete enough that you could describe the bank number, the contract, the conversation, the moment of confirmation. Hold that image for 60 seconds and ask your mind to treat it as familiar rather than foreign. Then for the remaining 60 seconds, ask yourself this single question. What is the one action available to me today that my future self, the one who already has this, would recognize as the right move? You do not need a long answer. 3 words is enough. Write them down, then begin your day. 2 minutes. 1 image. 1 question, 3 words. Here is the evening practice, equally simple. 2 minutes. After the day is over, before sleep reaches you, sit or lie still. Replay the day not as a performance review but as evidence. Ask what happened today that confirms this outcome is possible. Not what confirmed your doubt. What confirmed the possibility? Your mind will resist this at first. It has been trained for years to notice threat over opportunity, problem over progress. That training made sense once. It no longer serves you. So you override it gently nightly with one honest piece of evidence. One moment from your day where something moved in the right direction, even slightly. Then release the day. Sleep. 4 minutes total, morning and evening. That is the entire daily protocol. Now here is the projection, and this is where the compound interest becomes visible. At 30 days, you will not feel like a changed person. What you will notice, if you are paying close enough attention, is a mild increase in the frequency of useful thoughts appearing without effort. Ideas that feel relevant. Hesitations before decisions that used to be reflexive. A slightly shorter gap between recognizing an opportunity and taking it seriously. These shifts are small. They are also the first signs of new infrastructure forming. At 90 days, the hesitations become habits. The useful ideas start connecting to each other. You begin to notice a consistency in how you think about money that did not exist before. Not positivity, clarity. The difference matters enormously. Positive thinking alone is noise. Clarity about what you are building and why produces decisions. At 90 days, your decisions begin to carry a coherence that was not there before. People around you may notice this before you do. They will not be able to name it. They will call it focus or confidence or maturity. What it actually is updated infrastructure. At 365 days, the thought you practiced on day 1 is no longer the same thought. It has been repeated, reinforced, and refined through daily use until it fires automatically in the situations that used to trip you. The financial hesitation that once paralyzed you has been replaced by a clear internal signal. The impulsive spending that once felt inevitable is now simply less interesting than what you are building. You have not white-knuckled your way to discipline. Discipline, at this point, is just what your automatic responses look like, because your automatic responses have been rebuilt. This is the compound interest of mental habit, not metaphorical, neurological, measurable, available to anyone who practices it daily with the same seriousness they would bring to a financial instrument that doubled every 18 months. Now tie off the question from the opening of this chapter without dodging it. What would happen if the most important investment you ever made was not financial but neurological? This is what would happen. Your financial decisions would begin improving before you understood why. Your financial outcomes would begin shifting before the circumstances around you changed. And one day you would look back at the gap between who you are now and who you were 3 years ago, not with disbelief, but with the clear-eyed recognition that you built a road and then simply walked it. But here is what this chapter cannot fully tell you yet. The neurological shift and the financial shift are not the end of the process. They are the preparation for something that arrives only when the habits have run long enough to do something far more consequential than change your decisions. They begin to change who you believe you are. Further on, you will run into an idea about identity and wealth that breaks with the story most people inherited. Once that lands, it starts changing not just how you act, but what you are willing to claim. 4 minutes a day is not a small thing. It is the infrastructure of the person you are about to become. Chapter 9. The Skeptic Paid the Highest Price. Every culture that has ever risen and fallen on this earth has had a name for the person who stood at the edge of something new and refused to step forward. Not out of wisdom, not out of careful reasoning, but out of a fear so well-dressed it looked exactly like intelligence. In every era, in every language, across every generation, that person paid a price no one calculated for them in advance. The price was not dramatic. It was quiet. It was the slow, compounding cost of a door that never opened. You know that person. You may have been that person. And if you are honest with yourself right now, some part of that person is still inside you, wearing the face of common sense. This chapter is for that part of you, not to shame it. To finally see what it cost, here is the open loop. There is a question sitting underneath everything in this book. Most people never ask it directly. What if the most expensive thing you ever believed was not a bad investment, not a failed business, not a mistake you made with money, but a belief you held about how wealth works? That question is going to mean something specific before this chapter ends. You already know the skeptic's argument. You may have made it yourself. It sounds like this: I am not going to fall for magical thinking. I live in the real world. Thought is thought and money is money, and the two have nothing to do with each other unless you physically go out and earn it. That argument feels protective. It feels like the voice of someone who has been burned before, who learned not to trust things that seemed too easy, who watched other people chase ideas that went nowhere. That argument feels like wisdom because it arrived wearing wisdom's clothes. But here is what it actually was. It was fear wearing a three-piece suit. Return to the life you were living 3 years earlier. Not where you wanted to be. Where you actually were. The conversations you were having in your own head about money. About what was possible for you. About what kind of person gets to have financial freedom and whether that person looked anything like you. Were those thoughts optimistic? Were they open? Or were they closed, braced, already preparing for the disappointment they were certain was coming? That is the mirror moment. Not a comfortable one, but an honest one. The skeptic inside you was not protecting your money. Your skeptic was protecting your feelings. There is a real difference. Protecting your money means researching before you invest. It means asking hard questions. It means not handing cash to strangers with promises. That is caution. That is smart. What the skeptic was actually doing was something quieter and more costly. It was making sure you never believed anything hard enough to feel the sting of it not working. If you never fully commit to the idea that directed thought shapes your financial outcomes, you never have to test it. If you never test it, you never fail at it. If you never fail at it, you never get hurt by it. Clean, logical, and devastating. A woman named Petra ran a small alterations shop in a mid-sized city for 11 years. She was talented. Her customers loved her, but she had a rule she never said out loud. The rule was, do not expect more than this. The rule showed up as practicality. It showed up as humility. It showed up as the voice that said, be grateful for what you have, because wanting more only leads to losing what you already built. So Petra kept the shop small. She turned down a contract with a bridal boutique because the numbers seemed risky. She declined when a friend offered to back a second location. Every decision came from the same quiet place, the need to stay safe from the pain of wanting something and not getting it. At 61, Petra sold the shop for a number that covered 6 months of expenses. She told the buyer she hoped they would grow it. She meant it. She just never believed she could. The belief did not protect her income. It carved a ceiling right above her head and kept her under it for over a decade. Petra's story is not a tragedy about talent wasted. It is a precise picture of what the skeptic's tax looks like when it is paid in full. You may not be Petra, but you have paid some version of that tax. Everyone who has ever let skepticism function as a permanent identity rather than a temporary checkpoint has paid it. The question is not whether you paid it. The question is whether you are still paying it right now. Here is the release, not the shame, the release. Name the belief, not the comfortable version of it, the real version, something like, I do not believe my thoughts have any real influence on my financial situation. Or, I believe people who talk about the power of the mind are selling something. Or, I believe wanting something badly enough does not make it more likely to happen. Say the actual sentence in your mind. Own it. You held that belief. It made sense to you. It came from somewhere real. Now cost it. Not in dollars because you cannot calculate that precisely. Cost it in decisions. How many ideas did you dismiss before they had a chance to develop because your skeptic shut them down in the first 10 seconds? How many rooms did you walk out of? How many books did you close? How many conversations did you deflect because the whole premise felt too hopeful and hope felt dangerous? That is the cost, not a number, a pattern. Now replace it, not with blind faith, with the one thing the skeptic was never willing to use: evidence. You have been in this book long enough to know that the neuroscience is not optional decoration. The reticular activating system is not a metaphor. The way attention shapes perception, and perception shapes decision, and decision shapes outcome, that is a documented, observable, repeatable process. You are not being asked to believe something magical. You are being asked to stop refusing something mechanical. Your thoughts are infrastructure. The skeptic refused to build the infrastructure and then called the empty lot realistic. This is the close of the loop. The most expensive thing you ever believed was not a bad investment. It was the belief that the way you think has no bearing on what you earn. That belief cost you more than any single financial mistake. Because a financial mistake is a one-time event. A belief is a filter you apply to every single day. Every morning you wake up with it. Every decision you make passes through it. Every opportunity you encounter gets evaluated by it. One bad investment costs you once. One limiting belief about how wealth works costs you every day it remains intact. The skeptic phase was not irrational. It was understandable. It was protection, and at some point in your life you needed that protection. But you have enough evidence now. The mechanism is visible. The results are traceable. The pattern is documented in your own life. if you look honestly at the moments when your thinking changed and your outcomes followed. You do not need to punish yourself for the years the skeptic ran the show. You only need to decide that the skeptic is no longer the one making the calls. 4 minutes of daily, directed thought is the infrastructure. The skeptic's release is the foundation beneath the infrastructure. You cannot build on ground you are still defending. The new identity is not the believer who hopes this works. The new identity is the person who has already seen enough to act as if it works. Because acting as if is how every outcome in your financial life has ever actually begun. What are you willing to think on purpose, now that you know what thinking on accident has already cost you? Chapter 10. Yes, and you have already been doing it. You have been doing this your whole life. Not the polished, intentional version of it, the unconscious version. The version that ran quietly in the background while you told yourself you were just being realistic. And here is what makes that worth sitting with today. You got results. Real ones. Measurable ones. The very outcomes you most expected, positive or painful, have a habit of being the ones that actually showed up. That is not coincidence. That is not luck dressed in familiar clothes. That is a system working exactly as designed, except you were not the one doing the designing. So the question this chapter is going to answer, the one this entire book has been circling from the very first page, is not complicated. It is simply this. Is it really possible to get rich just by thinking? Yes. And the proof has been living inside your own history the entire time. Stay with that for one more moment before the celebration starts. There is something important on the other side of that yes. Something that has a price tag. You already know what a dominant belief sounds like. It sounds like the things you say without thinking. It sounds like the financial ceilings you stopped questioning years ago, because they had been in place so long they started to feel like facts. It sounds like the low-grade certainty that money is difficult, that people like you earn a certain kind of income, that getting ahead requires a specific kind of luck you have not had yet. Those beliefs did not arrive with a warning label. They arrived quietly, through repetition, through the people around you, through small disappointments stacked over years. And then they became infrastructure. Invisible, load-bearing, real. This book introduced the idea of the skeptic's tax early on. The cost paid by people who protect themselves from disappointment by refusing to believe that thought could have any real relationship to financial outcome. The skeptic's tax is not paid in one lump sum. It is charged daily in small, invisible increments. In the opportunity not considered, in the conversation not started, in the ask not made, in the plan not written down because some part of you decided the whole exercise was wishful thinking. The tax compounds. It is patient. And most people spend decades paying it without ever seeing the bill. Here is where that story changes. Picture the life you were living 3 years earlier. Not geographically, mentally. Think about what you believed was possible for you financially, specifically. Not what you hoped for in your most optimistic moments, but what you actually believed deep down when no one was watching and the room was quiet. Now look at where you are today, not in terms of what you wished, in terms of what you expected. For most people, those two things align in a way that is almost uncomfortable to acknowledge. The things you genuinely believed would happen, happened. The things you secretly believed would never work out, did not. The gap between where you wanted to be and where you are is, in most cases, almost exactly the size of the gap between what you desired and what you believed was actually available to you. That is the mechanism. Not magic, not mysticism. A mechanism. Rooted in attention, in neural habituation, in the way your brain filters signal from noise based on what it has been trained to find relevant. When you believe money flows easily toward people who solve valuable problems, your brain flags those problems. It surfaces them from ordinary conversation. It connects dots you would have otherwise ignored. When you believe money requires suffering or luck or someone's permission, your brain confirms that too. It finds the evidence. It builds the case. It protects the belief because the belief has been reinforced long enough to feel like identity. Thought is not decoration. Thought is infrastructure. And the most powerful thing about infrastructure is that once you understand how it was built, you can build something new. There is a woman named Carla who spent 11 years working in logistics, making a salary she described as fine. Not bad, not good, fine. She had a specific belief she had never actually examined, that she was someone who supported other people's big ideas rather than someone who had them. That belief shaped every professional decision she made. It shaped who she deferred to in meetings. It shaped which conversations she did not start. It shaped the salary she accepted without negotiation 3 years in a row, because somewhere beneath her conscious reasoning she had already decided that her ceiling was someone else's floor. Then one conversation with a mentor cracked something open. Someone who simply said, "You are describing their company but using the voice of someone who should be running one." Not immediately, not dramatically, slowly. Over the following year, Carla began to notice how often ideas came to her that she immediately handed away. She stopped doing that. Within 18 months, she had launched a small operation, nothing flashy, purely logistics consulting, and she doubled her previous income. She did not find new information. She changed the belief that was filtering the information she already had. The belief did not follow the money. The money followed the belief. Now, here is the thing this book has been building toward from the beginning. Here is where the open loop finally closes. The question was never whether thinking creates financial reality. The question the skeptic inside you was really asking was much more personal than that. It was this: does it work for someone like me? The skeptic's position was never purely philosophical. It was self-protective. Doubting the system felt safer than believing in it and then failing. Because if the system works and you fail, the implication becomes uncomfortable. But here is what the skeptic missed. You have already run the experiment. You ran it for years, without consent, without awareness, with a dominant financial belief installed by circumstance rather than chosen by design. And you got results that matched. That is not failure. That is proof of a working system. The only thing left is to run the experiment on purpose. This is the threshold. You are not being asked to believe in something you cannot verify. You are being asked to look clearly at what you have already verified in your own life with your own outcomes, and to decide consciously, deliberately, with full understanding of the cost of the alternative, what you will let run the system from here. One belief. That is where this starts. Not a vision board. Not a daily ritual with 17 steps. One dominant financial belief, stated aloud in plain language, that is specific enough to act on and honest enough that some part of you does not immediately dismiss it. Something like, I am someone who finds ways to earn more than I spend, and the gap between those two numbers grows each year. Or, I solve problems that people pay well to have solved. Say it in a way that does not sound like recitation. Say it in a way that sounds like memory. Like you are remembering something about yourself that was always true but that you forgot for a while. Because that is what this actually is. Not invention. Recovery. You are recovering a version of your own thinking that was never given the chance to operate without static. The static was the skeptic's tax. You have been paying it. Now you know what it costs. And now you get to decide whether you keep paying. The question was never whether thought builds wealth. Every financial outcome you have ever had began inside someone's head, yours or someone else's. The only real question was whether you were going to take conscious control of the thinking that already shapes everything. You are. Now the thinking begins.